We can do the timer on my phone if that doesn't work. Okay.
All right.
Because I don't know.
Sorry. Sorry.
All right. Good evening, everyone.
All right.
Welcome to the City of Ferndale Planning Commission meeting of August 17th, and I will call the meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. We will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Hoskew. Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Chair Foster.
Here.
Commissioner Showalter.
Here.
Commissioner Brazen.
Here.
And Councilman Polika.
Here.
We did hear from Commissioners Azar, Hagfors, and
Akers?
thank you, Akers, that they would not be able to attend this evening.
Motion to excuse by Brazen.
Motion by Brazen to excuse.
Second by Showalter.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have approval of the agenda. The agenda this evening consists of 2 public hearings and 1 site plan review and new business. Do we have any comments or edits for the agenda this evening?
I would move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Polika supports.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And we have consideration of the minutes from the July 20th Planning Commission meeting. Do I have any comments or edits to the meeting minutes from the 20th?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
As a motion by Polika and second by Hoskew. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Here, everyone. So, all right. So I think we're good. The motion passes. Since we have 6 tonight, we would do need everyone's voice in the motions. All right. Next, we will have a call to audience. The call to audience is for the opportunity for the public to speak on matters that are not on the agenda for this evening. So as a reminder, the items on the agenda for this evening are 2 public hearings, that being Plan Ferndale, the City of Ferndale Draft Master Plan, so a discussion from our staff consultant, an opportunity for public hearing on that, and then a consideration of the special land use application and site plan approval for 1401 Faro, an industrial site. And then we have new business, which is the consideration of a site plan approval for 800 Livernois, a multifamily development. So if anyone would like to speak on any items not on the agenda for this evening, now would be the time to do so. Seeing no, okay, seeing no, there, you're fine. I think I see no one approaching the dais, and so we can move on to item 5A, the public hearing for Plan Ferndale, the City of Ferndale, our draft master plan. And this evening, I think we will start with city staff to introduce our draft plan process. Thank you.
All right, good evening.
Christine, thank you.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Christine Ross. I am a project planner here with the City of Ferndale. So tonight we will be going over Plan Ferndale, where we've been, where we're going, and kind of where we're at presently, which is yesterday we concluded the 63-day public review period. Back on June 1st, we presented this item in front of you, and this body recommended to approve the distribution of the draft master plan for a 42-day period. We went back and we changed it to 63 days, so that 63-day period ended yesterday. So we've been gathering input, and on Monday we held a study session with the City Council, and we went over some of those comments, and we got some additional comments from City Council. So we will be going over that tonight. And where's the presentation?
Done that before we started recording.
Okay, so like I said, on Monday we held a study session. City Council requested more time to review the draft plan, So the deadline for council members to submit their comments is this Sunday, August 21st. The 63-day public review period ended yesterday, but there are future opportunities to gather more feedback. So this weekend we will be attending the Ferndale, or the Woodward Dream Cruise. Eventually, later in the month, I think in about a week, we'll go to Drifter Coffee, hold an event there. And then also later on this month, we will go to Rust Belt and hold an event there. The discussion board remains active, and social media posts are continuing to be posted, and those are extremely active as well. So tonight we will review the draft, go over council's comments, and hold a public hearing, but no vote will be taken tonight. Staff will review and implement comments before returning to the Planning Commission on either September 7th or September 21st. You guys can decide which date works best for you. And staff will forward the Planning Commission's recommendations from City Council at a future date to be determined. And then City Council will have the final vote on whether to adopt the plan or to send it back to the Planning Commission for additional review. So tonight we have one of our consultants, Kathleen Duffy. She is here to go over the presentation, as well as gather some more comments and feedback.
Through
So I
the
will
chair.
pass it to her.
Sorry, through the chair, I do want to make a clarification. On the first bullet point, it says the deadline to submit comments from council is 8/21. I believe it's 8/24. I believe it was the Wednesday.
Wednesday, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's just for city council's comments.
Yes.
Correct.
Welcome, Kathleen.
Good evening. Kathleen Duffy with Smith Group. It's good to be before you again. We were last here in June, and the plan has been out for review, like Christine said, during that time. And today we're excited to hear from the public, wrapping up the plan, but it's by no means done yet. So I'm hoping for some lively discussion. I'll give a summary of how we got here, and then again, responses to some of the comments. We've been tracking all the comments that have been coming in and addressing things like typos and things like that, and look forward to getting some feedback following the public hearing today from you on a couple of items, so that we can make edits to the plan appropriately, and then, like Christine said, eventually you guys will, approve a final version and give it to council. So just as a reminder, we've been working on this for about a year now, through a variety of phases, and the pandemic has made it a little challenging to get input, but we're excited that it's summer again, and Christine and team have been out getting lots of good feedback on the draft. We had a robust steering committee that met throughout the project and provided input and guidance, and helped review the draft, and we dealt with had an awesome community summit in October, where we really dived into a few key topics with the public and followed up through the holidays with similar input on those ideas. And like I said, we were here last with you on June 1st, where you gave us a bunch of feedback, and the plan eventually went out for that required 63-day review period. Now we're in bonus time, so there's nothing that says it can't be longer than 63 days, so that's where we are. We had a very robust session on Monday with council too, so I'm going to pepper in some of their comments. So the public hearing tonight will also, when you see the plan again in September, we'll also take public comment then. So as a reminder, Plan Ferndale is an update to the 2017 master plan, but incorporates broadly a new section of the plan called the Climate Action Plan, and also included the Parks and Rec Plan, which we sped along for a speedy update to be sure that we were eligible for MDNR grant funding in January. And so as part of that, we've looked at all of the recent plans that have happened since 2017, including the housing plan, the downtown possibilities plan, Ferndale moves, and council strategic plan. We use public feedback. I mentioned some of those opportunities. We'll update all these numbers at the conclusion of the plan review period, so that we get all the final numbers. We have a running list of everything that's been said that we'll provide to you, so that you can see all of the, we have provided that to you, so you can see all of the comments thus far, and like I said, we're keeping a list of everything and how we're going to address it in the final set of plan edits. We also updated the data and looked at more up-to-date data, especially the decennial census. The 2020 census numbers were released during the period of our work on this plan, so that is sprinkled throughout as well. And as I said, we based it heavily on the 2017 plan, which was very robust. In that plan, there were 4 guiding principles: progressive, equitable, sustainable, and resilient. And in this new plan, based on all of those other plans, that's what's color-coded down below each of these icons, pulling extra guiding principles based on other plans, and those are inclusive, healthy, thriving, and connected. And for each of these, we've incorporated them into the plan more robustly, making sure that each chapter of the plan makes a statement about how the recommendations included in that chapter meet each of them. The plan is divided into 2 main types of chapters. So the first vision elements are people, place, and systems, and those are a framework that we're intending to last with the plan probably longer than its 5-year shelf life. The idea is that we're building off the goals and objectives from your previous plan, pulling together things from Parks and Rec and all those other plans and documents, the housing plan that I mentioned, into forward-thinking 20-year, where do we want to be as a community in the future? And then specific more to the master plan and action plan are the action chapters. So these are kind of a to-do list. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about land use and its role in the master plan, but again, in this section, the brand new chapter on climate action, which really ties the city back to your work with ICLEI, who is helping monitor carbon emissions and working towards a strategy for decarbonizing the city, as supported by council's statement that they made towards being climate more neutral in the future, and then the implementation chapter. So we shuffled around the content from the previous plan into these 3 broader buckets, and tried to thematically group things based on where they kind of helped tell the story. We really focused on this plan update of making it easy to understand and making the language as jargon-less as we can. There's a limit to that with legally how we say things in a plan, but tried to make it as approachable as we could. And we heard loud and clear from the public how important people are to Ferndale, and that is what defines the character of the city, not necessarily all of the physical stuff. So traditionally in a land use plan, we focus on all the physical. Most of what you deal with as a planning commission has to do with the built environment, but we heard loud and clear how important the people are, so we wove in these new sections and expanded upon others to kind of paint that whole story of what is important to the people of Ferndale. Place really gets into more of the typical stuff that you all are all dealing with on a day-to-day basis related to development and how people get to and from different places. And then the systems chapter is largely new and ties most heavily to the climate action plan. And this really gives a more robust set of goals and objectives and strategies related to all of the different city systems, but also private systems, and how all the infrastructure needs are being met across the city. A little bit more on land use. We teed up the beginning of this chapter with this diagram to kind of explain more holistically everything that goes into land use. And while land use has been the overarching driving force for master plans for a long time, as I mentioned previously, we are expanding what a master plan can do and say to incorporate how land use decisions affect how people move and play and live within communities. So land use is guided both by what access there is to utilities and transportation, but also the systems and infrastructure that the city and private sources provide, how people strongly identify with their neighborhoods, looking at the intensity of use of how tall is too tall, how what is our Ferndale character, how do we define that? We have a whole section on that in the plan, but also compatibility and thinking about how more traditionally land use makes sense next to different neighboring uses. So the land use chapter in the plan is broken into a few different sections. And I wanted to just kind of give an overview of how this relates back to zoning. So the master plan that we're working on the draft with you tonight and have been for a while is updated every 5 years, and it's a policy guide. The zoning ordinance is a code that is adopted by council that is the law and regulations of what you can do with your property right now. And so future land use in the master plan sets the stage for future zoning decisions. It doesn't change anything immediately right now with what you can do with your property, but it provides guidance so that when those decisions come along related to zoning, it provides you with policy guidance, both language and descriptions to help guide your decision-making as a planning commission in the future. And so as part of that, the land use chapter is broken into a few different chunks that all work together to help provide you with the policy language and diagrams and text and considerations for when you're making future changes to zoning or special land uses like you have on the agenda later today. And so as part of that, some redevelopment strategies are areas of the city where we're expecting there may be more change than others. As a built-out community, there's not any big green fields that really that many remaining that the city can build upon. And so as a redevelopment-ready community, having that kind of redevelopment focus, knowing that anything that's going to come in and be a change in the community is likely going to happen along those areas. But that works in conjunction with the future land use place types. And in this plan, we've taken what were just little paragraph descriptions in your old plan and tried to make them more robust into a table with considerations that tie things back to those goals and principles related to climate and housing and sustainability and things like that. So those place type descriptions then describe the map, and the map itself categorizes things into categories that sort of generally relate to the zoning, but we provide a zoning plan, which I'll show in a minute, that gives you more detailed descriptions of how the future land use relates to future zoning. So here's an example of one of those place type descriptions. Again,
Kathleen, sorry to interrupt you. You're going with the flow and doing a really great job, so I hate to interrupt. But if you don't mind going back, I just think this is really important. I think you did a wonderful job of explaining it, but just to kind of reiterate, since it is very important, that we are looking at the master plan this evening, the draft master plan, in the process of adopting it, which has its own law requirements in terms of how that process goes, and what we're looking at, and also then in terms of the city. And like we said, we've increased the process, the length of this review period, et cetera. And so we're doing everything by the book, but then also to what we think is appropriate for the city. And that's the process that we're going through right now, the master plan. And the zoning process, or the zoning ordinance and map, are a completely different process with their own set of rules and regulations and process for adoption.
arrive at our community meeting. So if you feel comfortable doing so, please close your eyes, or you can have them open and just look downward. And we're going to just do some quick breathing to get centered. So bring attention to how you're sitting and find a way to be relaxed and alert. Your feet on the floor. Then bring attention to your breath. And take a deeper breath. We're going to take 3 breaths. Let it all out and shake it all out from your Mondays at work. So let go of what happened today at Monday at work or at home and come present into this meeting space. And just wanted to express my gratitude for everybody who's in the audience, for those who are watching on TV or online, for being part of our conversation today and learning about what your local government officials are up to, as well as your city staff. We are all here to support the community and love that you are availing yourself to better our city. So let's be curious, thoughtful, and compassionate and open as we discuss city business. All right, and with that, I invite you to stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America.
to the republic
For which it stands, one nation, under God,
liberty and justice for all. All right. And can we have roll call, please?
Mayor Pro Tem James.
Present.
Councilmember Leaks May.
Here.
Councilmember Mikulski.
Here.
Mayor Piana.
Here.
And Councilmember Polika is absent.
I move to, what's the word?
Excuse for having,
Thank you. I move to excuse the absence of Councilman Polika due to illness.
Support. All right, next up is approval of the agenda.
Mayor, I move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Second.
Moved by Leaks James and seconded by Mayor Leaks. Oh my God, I do that every meeting. Moved by Leaks May and seconded by James, Mayor Pro Tem James. Thanks.
Leaks May.
Yes.
James.
Yes.
Mikulski.
Yes.
Piana.
Yes. I just like to combine 2 great minds together. It's like peanut butter and chocolate. All right, next up is presentation is 4A. It's the Police Department 2021 Annual Report Presentation and Crime Report Update. And welcome to the dais, or the podium, Chief Emmy.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Dennis Emmy. I'm the Chief of Police for the City of Ferndale. And I'm proud to present a wonderful piece of work that I thought our Sergeant Zarowski and the Communications Department put together. It's our 2021 annual report. So I'm going to actually pull it up from our transparency dashboard, just a little reminder to everybody out there that all of our statistics are compiled monthly and saved to the transparency dashboard, which you can find through our department page on the city website. From there, you can click on existing annual reports, and we're going to start with the 2021 annual report. To go through this document page by page, word by word, would bore everybody to tears. So we're going to move through it briskly and touch on what I feel are the highlights of a very busy year. So. So our mission statement is partnering with our diverse community to provide public safety with integrity, professionalism, and honor. Our vision statement is we're always working to improve our community while recognizing the dedication and service of our employees. Our core values are integrity, compassion, service, commitment, and courage. 2021 marked near a historic change in turnover in our staff. Obviously, I was humbled to be appointed to Chief of Police at the end of 2020, but my official start date was January 1st of 2021. So I'm a little over a year and a half in, and it's been a terrific time. We also promoted Captain David Spellman on January 1st, as well as Lieutenant Dan Cousdale on January 1st. We had a couple of retirements that included Officer Jeff Pierce and Detective Brendan Moore. But what's really noteworthy, in one calendar year, we hired 12 personnel from our patrol and dispatch. This represents a turnover in 62.5% of our dispatch staff and a turnover of 16.6% of our officers or our sworn staff. So it's an incredible amount of turnover for HR and our admin team to process and hire and then move forward. Once they become members of the department, we have to train them, bring them up to speed on our policies, procedures, and teach them how to do it the Ferndale way. This doesn't happen without ongoing recruitment. We do a 24/7, 365 open recruitment. We have seen success in this where other departments tend to open and close recruiting windows. We find that we do pick up quality candidates by keeping it open and keeping an active, I guess, our fingers on the pulse of our candidate list. And we actively reach out, engage the people on our list, and court them because it's that competitive out there. I'm sure that everybody sees that in not only in the public safety ranks, but in the private sector as well. If you're not monitoring your candidates and courting them, they will find other employment. So we are measuring up well. When I talk to my colleagues across Oakland County and across Southeast Michigan, many are operating several positions short, where we are at full staff or actually preemptively hiring prior to those openings coming open. So that is a credit to the HR mission, and my admin staff is just doing a fantastic job of filling these gaps. That does set us aside from many of the organizations around here. One thing we have done to enhance our recruitment, we're constantly trying to reach out to minorities through different websites and different publications. We are actively seeking lateral transfers. This infusion of lateral transfers and experience helps us bridge the gap from hiring 21, 22-year-old police officers who have never worked in law enforcement before, by getting an influx of experience through, anecdotally, from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. We've had tremendous success bringing in candidates from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, also from the Detroit Police Department. We are also hoping that this targeting these lateral transfers will hopefully bring us some diversity in our workforce through some of these other agencies. Patrol Division is operated under the command of Captain David Spellman. Like I said, he's a 25-year officer. He's been in the captain role since January 1st of last year, and he's doing a fantastic job of community engagement and moving forward on our initiatives. Our Patrol Division operates on 12-hour shifts, a day shift, A side and B side, and a night shift, A side and B side. And they're under the command of, last year it was under the command of Lieutenant Patak and Lieutenant Andre on the day shift, and the night shifts were Lieutenant Collette and Cousdale. Last year the Detective Bureau was staffed and commanded by Detective Lieutenant Casey O'Loughlin. As of January 1st of this year, though, we made a development change only because we're looking to increase the development opportunities across our command staff. We moved Lieutenant Patak into the Detective Bureau. And it had nothing to do with Detective or Lieutenant O'Loughlin's performance. It was about creating development across the entire workforce. So we had many significant cases in 2021 that I'm not going to go into the details, but there was an unusual uptick in violent crime and it's across the country. So we're not immune to the violent crime that's happening across the country. We had attempted sexual assault at 7-Eleven with an arrest made, a home invasion with stolen firearms with an arrest made, armed robberies in our residential neighborhood with an arrest made, and of our 7-Eleven with an arrest made. Our units and teams, there's lots of opportunities in our department. Janessa Danielson runs our professional standards unit. She does a fantastic job. She's in charge of accreditation management, which is it's a lot to ask. She also helps with the special event programs. Really does a fantastic job. I think nobody here is a stranger to the job that CEO Malmeister does. She's got her fingers in just about every community group in our city, and she's really doing a fantastic job. Records is run by Tamika Brooks. Tamika has, I think, 35 years of experience with the city of Ferndale, and I'm hoping I can keep her for another 5 years. She really does a fantastic job. She coordinates FOIAs along with the city clerk's office and manages all of our data. We have several multi-jurisdictional units that include the Oakland County Narcotics, which is a local narcotics team that focuses their attention on community drug enforcement. We also are members of a task force at the DEA that is headquartered out of the Detroit office. We have 2 officers that are assigned to the Oakland County SWAT team, which is one of the more advanced SWAT teams in the country, so that it really is something that we're able to participate in a program like that. We're also part of a part-time mobile field force unit that's staffed by officers all over the county for civil unrest. Some of our other units include the Oakland County FBI Gang and Violent Crimes Task Force. This unit was instrumental in the recovery of a local kidnapped youth last year. Without their assistance and our participation in that unit, it would have been a much more difficult operation. Our auxiliary unit is staffed by volunteers, and they work a lot of our special events and traffic details, and sometimes they come in at a moment's notice to help with storms. Like everybody else in the city and around the world, we made a lot of precautions to tailor our response to the needs of created by COVID-19. So there's a little piece in here on our response to COVID-19 for our personnel and our response, trying to provide services as seamlessly as possible over the course of the pandemic. Special events, there's a little picture of our emergency vehicle show every Dream Cruise. We're presenting the local championship trophy. Street Corner Roundtable is one of our bigger community engagement events. I know that we have one scheduled for this Wednesday. Hopefully we can see some of you out there and some of the residents so we can talk about issues going on in their neighborhood, and it doesn't have to be totally restricted to police service. If there's any kind of issue across the city, we at the police department think that our Peace app is kind of the switchboard for the city, and we can make sure that we farm any complaints or requests for service to the appropriate department. Fair and impartial policing and use of force is obviously a sensitive topic across law enforcement in this country. We do monitor use of force, every single use of force, and we'll get to some numbers briefly or shortly. But fair and impartial policing is a way of auditing the behavior of our officers and our staff by randomly checking body-worn camera footage, or while we're looking at evidence captured on any in-car or body-worn camera footage, we're always looking at this not only from a criminal prosecution perspective, but we're also looking at it through an appropriateness perspective or policy violation. And we always, we have the policy of not passing up any mistakes or opportunities to train or counsel our staff. We were the first to have body-worn cameras back in 2017 in Oakland County. We're proud of that. That's because we got in so early on that technology. We're also due right now for an upgrade. Citizens Police Academy is another one of our big community engagement tools. It's fantastic to meet people around the community. Typically about 20 citizens a year are chosen to participate in a four-week program where they get to learn how their local police department operates and try to eliminate some of the mystery behind law enforcement, behind the badge. We're very lucky to have in this last group, the Oakland County prosecutor, Karen McDonald, was very generous with her time and came down and spoke to the group personally. So that is a first. So our response to resistance policy, which is commonly referred to as use of force, in 2021, we had 18,177 calls for service. Officers made 449 arrests throughout that year. Of these total calls for service, there were 25 documented incidents of use of force. And this is a breakdown of those numbers. And again, we don't want to get in the weeds too much with the numbers, but if you ever want to take a deeper dive into these statistics, they are all on the transparency dashboard. And I'm happy to field any questions if you look into those numbers. And obviously, anybody in the public, feel free to contact me through the website, and I'm happy to return your email. The ARC system and the transparency dashboard. ARCS is the vendor, which is now bought out by Tyler Technologies, but they are the vendor that built the transparency dashboard, which went live in 2021. And as national standards go, it is at the top of the industry for number of data sets, where some would only get into, like some in Oakland County only released 3 categories, where we expanded it much further than that. We'll get into that shortly. We in the city of Ferndale and the Ferndale Police Department have embraced President Obama's executive order and the 21st century policing model. The 6 pillars are building trust and legitimacy, policy and oversight, technology and social media, community policing and crime reduction, training and education, and officer wellness and safety. I can proudly say that we have touched on every single one of those pillars, and we're trying, obviously there really is no destination along this trail. It's always a journey. Perfection is something that probably will never be achieved, but that's the goal. But we're going to continue to work towards that. There's been a push in law enforcement across the country to blend law enforcement and community health and human services. The mental health crisis in our country has been in the news a lot over the last few years. And we're trying to bridge that gap in services through partnerships like the one with Common Ground. and Hope Not Handcuffs. Very proud of Hope Not Handcuffs. This is a new program, which is kind of the follow-up. Actually, Hope Not Handcuffs was the original. There's a follow-up to Hope Not Handcuffs, which is called the Comeback Program. In the Comeback Program, our quick response team that's made up of mental health professionals, people who suffered from substance abuse that are now in recovery. They act as coaches. They go throughout our community based on input through police reports and possibly arrests or ambulance calls, that type of thing. And they go knock on doors after they've had incidents where they've been sent to the hospital on a medical related to an overdose. So in that time, we've had 25 victims of overdoses that have accepted peer coaching services, and 9 have accepted family coaching services. So I would think that I would consider that a success. We're trying, like I said, we're trying to bridge the gap and plug the holes as we see fit. So that covers the 2021 annual report. I really do think the communications team did a beautiful job with this. We're going to go back to cover some brief statistics from the dashboard. And just like a little orientation, it might be a little review for some. So in 2022, we'll go 2021 first. In 2021, we fielded over almost 20,000 calls for service, 19,917. And give you a year to date for 2022, we are currently sitting at 11,400. So we're probably on pace for a similar number of calls for service. From a citation standpoint, when you think citations, think tickets. In 2021, we issued 2,174 traffic violations. In 2022, we're at 3,000 currently. And to get a better view of this is through the 4-year comparison. Kind of gives you a better idea, like, just giving the numbers 1 year at a time doesn't really paint a picture of contrast or perspective, but when you compare the 4-year total, it kind of gives you an idea where we're at. Obviously, during the pandemic years, numbers were down significantly. We're going to jump ahead to Russ. So arrests in 2021, our officers arrested 487. Today, to date, we are at 388. And to provide a 4-year perspective, gives you an idea where we're at now. This is 2022 here in the middle. So, moving ahead, like response to resistance or use of force. I know this is important to everybody. It's important to us. We want to be as transparent as possible. And in 2021, like I said, out of 18,000 calls for service, we only had 25 uses of force. Compared to today, in 2022, we were only at 10 for the entire year of 2022. So it kind of provides some perspective of how seriously we take it and how our officers really use a lot of restraint on a daily basis and make good decisions. Training is a priority with our department, and we decided that training hours should be open for everybody to see, to show our commitment to that. Since we began the dashboard, we've trained our staff with over 3,000 hours of training. In 2022, we have over 1,800 hours of training for our staff across many categories. And as we scroll down, it gives you an idea of where we put that training. In 2022, it's in emergency vehicle operations, mental health response, leadership training, cultural awareness and ethics, dispatch training, legal training, and then bloodborne pathogens, investigative training, and response to resistance or use of force training. There's always the crime map available on our dashboard to give you current idea of what's going on in your neighborhoods by clicking on the crime map, and you can zoom in and out and find your neighborhood and see what's going on in your neighborhood. This is always available. And the filtering mechanism can also filter out certain types of crimes, so you can cut to the chase. Traffic crashes. This map gives you an idea of where the traffic crashes are happening, and it breaks it, and you can filter out by dates and instances, and shows you who's involved in our crashes. Citizen complaints. I'm very proud of our staff. We definitely take complaints through all mechanisms, whether it's anonymous, whether it's by phone, by internet, by email, by voice. In all of 2021, we had 7 complaints against staff members at the police department, all of which are investigated, and the complainants are given written dispositions based on their complaint, whether it's founded, unfounded, as such. And there's a little breakdown of how those statistics were investigated and a breakdown of their dispositions. This year to date, we only have 1 complaint against a staff member, but we take them all seriously. Crime trends can be a little complicated because we're still in the developmental stage of the crime comparison, but this is 2022 at a glance. Total crime in the city of Ferndale is down 32% from 2021. Crime change from 2020 is 7.7, and you see it changes over time, but since 2017 we're down just 3.3. So you can see the pandemic had a serious effect on inconsistencies in data and policing, and the statistics that were coming out of the pandemic were kind of an anomaly. And if you drill down a little bit further, it'll break down, like, obviously these are our top 10 categories by year. These are the percentage change in the last year. And basically, if there's anything above, that shows an increase. And when you look at these, you got to kind of take it with a grain of salt. Burglaries, it says it's up 133%. That's typically not a crime that happens frequently. So if you only had a couple last year, you could have just a couple more, and all of a sudden it's 133%. But it would be a little too much to go through all these categories. I invite everybody to check this out on the dashboard. And again, if you have any questions, I'm free anytime. Anything that's below the line would be a decrease in crime. Obviously, like in this case, embezzlement's down 67%. But again, if there's not a lot of embezzlements reported, that can be exaggerated by the 100% or that you're seeing in the statistics. And we added mental health referrals because we thought it was important to show our commitment towards working with Common Ground in the mental health crisis. In total, since we started our program, we've had 62 referrals to Oakland County Mental Health, and Common Ground. These are followed up within 24 to 48 hours by a mental health professional. And we've received very good feedback from our partnership. We work with Common Ground regularly, trying to get on the same page. They're like us, they have a huge turnover in staff, so it really does put the onus on us to keep a fresh relationship and keep touching base, make sure we're on the same page. Here's a breakdown of some of the, how we're coming in to contact with these referrals. 50% come from dispatches, some come from family, and then you break down that some are deferred, like in this case, this was an arrest that we decided shouldn't have been an arrest or a criminal complaint, but rather a mental health issue, so they were referred to Common Ground. So, and then on the last page, again, we're proud to be an accredited agency by the Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police, and on this page, we publicly house many of our policies that we think the public would be interested in. If there's a policy here if there's a policy not reflected in this list and you have interest in it, feel free to contact me on the website. I promise you that I will send you that policy right away in the interest of transparency. And I will happy to explain it to you or walk you through it, whether you're a member of the council or the or resident. At any rate, this really does complete my presentation, and I'm free to answer any questions you have. I know it's a lot of statistics, and it can easily get away from you. So that's why, out of the interest of being humane, I spared you from some of it.
Well, I really appreciate the update and the walkthrough of the report. I thought it was well done as well. My first question is, I can't remember how often we submit accreditation compliance for, and so when's this annual report due? Because it's part of our compliance.
We have to publish one annually. There isn't a due date for each annual report, but it's certainly part of the accreditation standard, and we are set for our reaccreditation next October. So Sergeant Danielson is continually pulling proofs that we are following what our policies and doing what we say we're doing. She's currently into year 2 of our accreditation proof gathering, and next summer auditors from Michigan Association of Chiefs of Police will come down and do on-site reaccreditation and go through all of our files, so that we have that. We're looking forward to that next year.
Are there questions from council on what we just received? We've come a long way.
I appreciate that. I truly do. I really have to give a lot of credit to my staff, and the communications department has been with us lockstep. The HR department, I really can't say enough about the partnership with Dan and his team. They really are helping us keep a leg up on our competition. They really are. So thank you.
Thank you so much. All right, we are going on to the next presentation, which is 4B, is the resolution to acknowledge the public service of Water Supervisor Dan Harper. And I believe Joe is going to introduce this.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I
can also run my alarm on my phone if you want. We can do the timer on my phone if that doesn't work. Okay.
All right.
Sorry. Sorry.
All right, good evening, everyone.
All right.
Welcome to the City of Ferndale Planning Commission meeting of August 17th, and I will call the meeting to order at 6:31 p.m. We will start with a roll call.
Commissioner Hoskew. Commissioner Baker.
Here.
Chair Foster.
Here.
Commissioner Showalter.
Here.
Commissioner Brazen.
Here.
And Councilman Polika.
Here.
We did hear from Commissioners Azar, Hagfors, and
Akers?
thank you, Akers, that they would not be able to attend this evening.
Motion to excuse by Brazen?
Motion by Brazen to excuse.
Second by Showalter.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion passes. Next, we have approval of the agenda. The agenda this evening consists of 2 public hearings and 1 site plan review and new business. Do we have any comments or edits for the agenda this evening?
I would move that we approve the agenda as presented.
Polika supports.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. And we have consideration of the minutes from the July 20th Planning Commission meeting. Do I have any comments or edits to the meeting minutes from the 20th?
I move that we accept the minutes as presented.
As a motion by Polika and second by Hoskew. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Here, everyone, so, all right, so I think we're good. The motion passes. Since we have 6 tonight, we would, do need everyone's voice in the motions. All right, next we will have a call to audience. The call to audience is for the opportunity for the public to speak on matters that are not on the agenda for this evening. So as a reminder, the items on the agenda for this evening are 2 public hearings, that being Plan Ferndale, the City of Ferndale Draft Master Plan, so a discussion from our staff consultant, an opportunity for public hearing on that, and then a consideration of the special land use application and site plan approval for 1401 Faro, an industrial site. And then we have new business, which is the consideration of a site plan approval for 800 Livernois, a multifamily development. So if anyone would like to speak on any items not on the agenda for this evening, now would be the time to do so. Seeing no, okay, seeing no, there, you're fine. I think I see no one approaching the dais, and so we can move on to item 5A, the public hearing for Plan Ferndale, the City of Ferndale, our draft master plan. And this evening, I think we will start with city staff to introduce our draft plan process. Thank you.
All right, good evening.
Christine, thank you.
Good evening, Planning Commission. My name is Christine Ross. I am a project planner here with the City of Ferndale. So tonight we will be going over Plan Ferndale, where we've been, where we're going, and kind of where we're at presently, which is yesterday we concluded the 63-day public review period. Back on June 1st, we presented this item in front of you, and this body recommended to approve the distribution of the draft master plan for a 42-day period. We went back and we changed it to 63 days, so that 63-day period ended yesterday. So we've been gathering input, and on Monday, we held a study session with the City Council, and we went over some of those comments, and we got some additional comments from City Council. So we will be going over that tonight. And here's the presentation.
Done that before we started recording.
Okay, so like I said, on Monday, we held a study session. City Council requested more time to review the draft plan. So the deadline for council members to submit their comments is this Sunday, August 21st. The 63-day public review period ended yesterday, but there are future opportunities to gather more feedback. So this weekend we will be attending the Ferndale, or the Woodward Dream Cruise. Eventually, later in the month, I think in about a week, we'll go to Drifter Coffee, hold an event there. And then also later on this month, we will go to Rust Belt and hold an event there. The discussion board remains active, and social media posts are continuing to be posted, and those are extremely active as well. So tonight we will review the draft, go over council's comments, and hold a public hearing, but no vote will be taken tonight. Staff will review and implement comments before returning to the Planning Commission on either September 7th or September 21st. You guys can decide which date works best for you. And staff will forward the Planning Commission's recommendations from City Council at a future date to be determined. And then City Council will have the final vote on whether to adopt the plan or to send it back to the Planning Commission for additional review. So tonight we have one of our consultants, Kathleen Duffy. She is here to go over the presentation, as well as gather some more comments and feedback.
Through
So I
the
will
chair.
pass it to her.
Sorry, through the chair, I do want to make a clarification. On the first bullet point, it says the deadline to submit comments from council is 8/21. I believe it's 8/24. I believe it was the Wednesday.
Wednesday, okay.
Yeah.
All right, thank you.
That's just for city council's comments.
Yes.
Correct.
Welcome, Kathleen.
Good evening. Kathleen Duffy with Smith Group. It's good to be before you again. We were last here in June, and the plan has been out for review, like Christine said, during that time. And today we're excited to hear from the public, wrapping up the plan, but it's by no means done yet. So I'm hoping for some lively discussion. I'll give a summary of how we got here, and then again, responses to some of the comments. We've been tracking all the comments that have been coming in and addressing things like typos and things like that, and look forward to getting some feedback following the public hearing today from you on a couple of items, so that we can make edits to the plan appropriately, and then, like Christine said, eventually you guys will, approve a final version and give it to council. So just as a reminder, we've been working on this for about a year now, through a variety of phases, and the pandemic has made it a little challenging to get input, but we're excited that it's summer again, and Christine and team have been out getting lots of good feedback on the draft. We had a robust steering committee that met throughout the project and provided input and guidance, and helped review the draft, and we dealt with had an awesome community summit in October, where we really dived into a few key topics with the public and followed up through the holidays with similar input on those ideas. And like I said, we were here last with you on June 1st, where you gave us a bunch of feedback, and the plan eventually went out for that required 63-day review period. Now we're in bonus time, so there's nothing that says it can't be longer than 63 days, so that's where we are. We had a very robust session on Monday with council too, so I'm going to pepper in some of their comments. So the public hearing tonight will also, when you see the plan again in September, we'll also take public comment then. So as a reminder, Plan Ferndale is an update to the 2017 master plan, but incorporates broadly a new section of the plan called the Climate Action Plan, and also included the Parks and Rec Plan, which we sped along for a speedy update to be sure that we were eligible for MDNR grant funding in January. And so as part of that, we've looked at all of the recent plans that have happened since 2017, including the housing plan, the downtown possibilities plan, Ferndale moves, and council strategic plan. We use public feedback. I mentioned some of those opportunities. We'll update all these numbers at the conclusion of the plan review period, so that we get all the final numbers. We have a running list of everything that's been said that we'll provide to you, so that you can see all of the, we have provided that to you, so you can see all of the comments thus far. And like I said, we're keeping a list of everything and how we're going to address it in the final set of plan edits. We also updated the data and looked at more up-to-date data, especially the decennial census. The 2020 census numbers were released during the period of our work on this plan, so that is sprinkled throughout as well. And as I said, we based it heavily on the 2017 plan, which was very robust. In that plan, there were 4 guiding principles: progressive, equitable, sustainable, and resilient. And in this new plan, based on all of those other plans, that's what's color-coded down below each of these icons, pulling extra guiding principles based on other plans, and those are inclusive, healthy, thriving, and connected. And for each of these, we've incorporated them into the plan more robustly, making sure that each chapter of the plan makes a statement about how the recommendations included in that chapter meet each of them. The plan is divided into 2 main types of chapters. So the first vision elements are people, place, and systems, and those are a framework that we're intending to last with the plan probably longer than its 5-year shelf life. The idea is that we're building off the goals and objectives from your previous plan, pulling together things from Parks and Rec and all those other plans and documents, the housing plan that I mentioned, into forward-thinking 20-year, where do we want to be as a community in the future? And then specific more to the master plan and action plan are the action chapters. So these are kind of a to-do list. So I'm going to be talking a bit more about land use and its role in the master plan, but again, in this section, the brand new chapter on climate action, which really ties the city back to your work with ICLEI, who is helping monitor carbon emissions and working towards a strategy for decarbonizing the city, as supported by council's statement that they made towards being climate more neutral in the future, and then the implementation chapter. So we shuffled around the content from the previous plan into these 3 broader buckets, and tried to thematically group things based on where they kind of helped tell the story. We really focused on this plan update of making it easy to understand and making the language as jargon-less as we can. There's a limit to that with legally how we say things in a plan, but tried to make it as approachable as we could. And we heard loud and clear from the public how important people are to Ferndale, and that is what defines the character of the city, not necessarily all of the physical stuff. So traditionally in a land use plan, we focus on all the physical. Most of what you deal with as a planning commission has to do with the built environment, but we heard loud and clear how important the people are, so we wove in these new sections and expanded upon others to kind of paint that whole story of what is important to the people of Ferndale. Place really gets into more of the typical stuff that you all are all dealing with on a day-to-day basis related to development and how people get to and from different places. And then the systems chapter is largely new and ties most heavily to the climate action plan. And this really gives a more robust set of goals and objectives and strategies related to all of the different city systems, but also private systems, and how all the infrastructure needs are being met across the city. A little bit more on land use. We teed up the beginning of this chapter with this diagram to kind of explain more holistically everything that goes into land use. And while land use has been the overarching driving force for master plans for a long time, as I mentioned previously, we are expanding what a master plan can do and say to incorporate how land use decisions affect how people move and play and live within communities. So land use is guided both by what access there is to utilities and transportation, but also the systems and infrastructure that the city and private sources provide, how people strongly identify with their neighborhoods, looking at the intensity of use, of how tall is too tall, how what is our Ferndale character, how do we define that? We have a whole section on that in the plan, but also compatibility and thinking about how more traditionally land use makes sense next to different neighboring uses. So the land use chapter in the plan is broken into a few different sections. And I wanted to just kind of give an overview of how this relates back to zoning. So the master plan that we're working on the draft with you tonight, and have been for a while, is updated every 5 years, and it's a policy guide. The zoning ordinance is a code that is adopted by council that is the law and regulations of what you can do with your property right now. And so future land use in the master plan sets the stage for future zoning decisions. It doesn't change anything immediately right now with what you can do with your property, but it provides guidance so that when those decisions come along related to zoning, it provides you with policy guidance, both language and descriptions to help guide your decision-making as a planning commission in the future. And so as part of that, the land use chapter is broken into a few different chunks that all work together to help provide you with the policy language and diagrams and text and considerations for when you're making future changes to zoning or special land uses like you have on the agenda later today. And so as part of that, some redevelopment strategies are areas of the city where we're expecting there may be more change than others. As a built-out community, there's not any big green fields that really that many remaining that the city can build upon. And so as a redevelopment-ready community, having that kind of redevelopment focus, knowing that anything that's going to come in and be a change in the community is likely going to happen along those areas. But that works in conjunction with the future land use place types. And in this plan, we've taken what were just little paragraph descriptions in your old plan and tried to make them more robust into a table with considerations that tie things back to those goals and principles related to climate and housing and sustainability and things like that. So those place type descriptions then describe the map, and the map itself categorizes things into categories that sort of generally relate to the zoning, but we provide a zoning plan, which I'll show in a minute, that gives you more detailed descriptions of how the future land use relates to future zoning. So here's an example of one of those place type descriptions. Again,
Kathleen, sorry to interrupt you. You're going with the flow and doing a really great job, so I hate to interrupt. But if you don't mind going back, I just think this is really important. I think you did a wonderful job of explaining it, but just to kind of reiterate, since it is very important, that we are looking at the master plan this evening, the draft master plan, in the process of adopting it, which has its own law requirements in terms of how that process goes, and what we're looking at, and also then in terms of the city. And like we said, we've increased the process, the length of this review period, et cetera. And so we're doing everything by the book, but then also to what we think is appropriate for the city. And that's the process that we're going through right now, the master plan. And the zoning process, or the zoning ordinance and map, are a completely different process with their own set of rules and regulations and process for adoption, et cetera. And so I just want to really clearly, that we are not making any zoning changes currently, and that would be of something that we would potentially do in the future, is make any amendments to our zoning ordinance or map based on the master plan process for the city.
right, the master plan is just providing guidance for potential future changes.
Thank you.
And so hopefully this will provide you with that framework, with a little bit more meat and detail into what things related to both land use, but character and redevelopment, and how things relate to green space. So each of these place types has its own set of strategies of how it relates back to the plan elements. And the draft future land use map, again, has colors that relate to those place types. But the zoning plan provides pretty specific detail, which we are happy to update as the discussions continue on the draft. But we found that doing this with both use, which is this first chunk of the zoning plan, about which uses generally make sense in each of these categories, but also form considerations when we're thinking about what it's like to walk up and down a corridor, what are the most important kind of physical features. And so this works together to help explain what is shown on the map. The implementation chapter is also we've added a lot more detail from the 2017 plan. The 2017 plan listed actions in table form, and annually staff would update council and you all on what had been accomplished in the previous years and discuss what should be priorities in the future. And we added this diagram to kind of show how that master plan is an ongoing process. So yes, we make changes and adopt it every 5 years, but every year you all go through the process of setting priorities and trying to accomplish some of those actions. And it can be amended in a less than 5-year period too. So we really wanted to focus on the relationship between you as a body and council and the public and city staff and how all of those pieces work together. We set it up in the introduction chapter, this idea of balancing all of these different priorities, right? Everyone from property owners to people that are either rent or own in the community or run a business or have some sort of stake in the community. Everyone comes at it from a different perspective and trying to find consensus among all of those entities that make sense for a long-term horizon, right? So there are short-term and long-term recommendations in the plan, but ultimately we're looking like, what is Ferndale going to look like in 2030 and beyond? And so by having those guiding principles, by having a public input here tonight and throughout the process, it's an iterative process that goes through change, and nothing is set in stone for too long. You guys have been very progressive in keeping things up to date and changing and evolving as things have happened and evolved throughout the years. And so we just wanted to capture that. And one of those new tools is a decision-making checklist. And when I explained this to council on Monday, I said, we heard loud and clear from the public that they don't always understand how decisions are made. And so we took from a variety of different sources, we took each of the guiding principles from the plan and wrote some statements that generally support the recommendations in the plan in a succinct way. And the hope is that this can be a tool that evolves over time as it's used either by you or other commissions or the council or the public. To try and hold one another accountable and think about how best the different guiding principles can be, the push and pull and the give and take between not every project can check off every single one of these boxes, but how many? Can we strive to get as many as we can and balancing those trade-offs? This is, again, a new thing that it may or may not work, and you may decide to just throw it away in the future. That's fine too, or make it into more of a scorecard. So there are a couple of examples of communities that have given actual value and quantified this stuff so that when they are determining incentives and things like that, they can show how different projects and different initiatives stack up against the plans as in a qualitative kind of metric form. So the action plan, definitely a work in progress. We talked a lot about this with council. They gave staff the assignment to break all this up by the different departments and make sure that all of the actions are realistic and timely, and figuring out who are those, the time frames make sense. So when they're getting into, okay, what's our first year action plan going to look like? Is that realistic? Do we have enough staff and time and body? And what can we get done in year one? And so before the draft is adopted, this will have more refinements to it so that staff and all the different departments can make sure that everything we've heard throughout the process is incorporated in it, but also understanding their responsibility as different departments. Because we don't want all of the plan's implementation to fall on the shoulders of one entity in the city. And it goes beyond the city into all of the key partnerships with our neighbors and MDOT and the county and energy providers, all of the different school districts. A lot of people have interactions with how policy decisions are made in the future. So council is going to be looking at it in more detail, as well as staff, and we invite you all to as well. So with that, I'm just going to round out and summarize a little bit about what Christine and the planning team has been up to and getting comments during the public review process, and tee up a couple of slides to help at least in some cases answer some questions, but more to prepare you for a discussion following the public hearing. So I will present some of the findings and some of the proposed changes to the plan, and it'll be up for discussion. You'll get to hear from the public, and then you as a commission can decide how to move forward and work on how to either change things, resolve things, re-emphasize things. So I will do my best to be as succinct as I can. So as Christine mentioned, we've had social media going out. The city has continued to blast out more, and they have plans to in the next couple weeks here. As we know, we have a few more summer events happening. There have been lawn signs. People have been very active on the discussion board. And like I said, we've been pulling the comments into a spreadsheet to make sure that they're all being heard and figuring out how to address different ones in different parts of the plan or forward them to different city departments so that they are getting notified. Here's a list of all of the different events that have happened over the summer. It's actually been a good time to have the plan out for review so that staff can be out and about and going to meeting people where they are to let them know what's going on. And as Christine mentioned, the Dream Cruise and Rust Belt Market and Drifter Coffee are upcoming sessions in the next couple weeks as we wrap up the listening phase on the draft plan. Just get a quick drink. So one of the things that we heard about was adding more language to this page about green space. And I have a couple slides on this. I think the biggest takeaway is that this was lightly edited from the 2017 plan, and we'd love to hear more about what it should say or whether it should even exist in the plan. We provided the redevelopment strategies, they're left over from your previous plan, to help accompany the land use because there's only so much you can say on a map, and some of those sites have more nuance. And a lot has changed since the last time this plan was adopted, and it needs to be revised. It was approved for an industrial site plan in 2019, which that site plan has since expired. We had asked for some help to reframe this and didn't get a lot of all of the direction that we need, so we're looking forward to having a little bit more conversation about what we say or don't say here. So these are the three bullets that speak directly to that preserving natural green space and attempting to capture that language, including preserving mature tree stands and partnering with whatever remediation could happen in the future. Again, should we add to this, delete? We tried to capture what we thought was being said, but it's, you know, it comes down to what is the best use for that site in the future and how much within the means of planning and zoning that we can do to guide that in the future. So it had originally been future land use planned for mixed use in 2017, which is why there's some leftover language in there about a variety of uses. But when we were updating the map late last year, there was still a site plan that we expected industrial expansion to happen, but that's not happening anymore, and the current owner has worked with the neighbors to make sure that he's committed to preserving the green space there. But we changed it to industrial because it was, like I said, there was a site plan approved and Detroit Axle is there. But on Monday, we talked through some potential options for revising this, and I just want to kind of tee those up that it's currently zoned industrial, but what the future land use plan does is set up for future zoning. And so there were some discussions of, do we split how we color code the parcel? I think whether or not we lose that page that goes into a little bit more detail, it has to be something on the map. And so you could keep industrial fronting 8 Mile. You could have either of these lines, A or B, be a transition line. You can see sort of here on the aerial where there are trees and then where there's just green space to the north bordering the high school. All of those could be different things. It could be mixed use, it could be residential, it could be industrial. The challenge with showing green space here as the category on the plan is that there's no zoning that corresponds to that. And because this is a document that sets the stage for future rezonings, we think a better option would be to future land use plan it if this is the direction that makes sense based on what the public's going to say and what you all are thinking about, to designate it as planned unit development for the sake that because it's a privately held property the opportunity to protect the tree canopy. Whatever we write in the plan, it can only go so far, but if we future land use plan it potentially to PUD, then that gives the city some negotiating power. So when, if the site were to redevelop, let's say in 20 years when things have changed, depending on what's in the master plan. That's why we included the site in the master plan, because we wanted to put some bullet points for what seemed important. Again, maybe some of those need to go because they were from the 2017 plan, but what are the things that are most important for this site, like preserving the trees and being a good transition to the neighbors, and remediating the site. I think that's another thing I don't want to fail to mention is it's heavily contaminated and as a Superfund site, I believe. And so whatever happens on this site, it needs some environmental attention. And so by future land use planning it as PUD, it would ensure that any future rezoning, it would be like proactively zoning it as a PUD, where you could say, you as the city then have some negotiating back and forth with whatever future developer might come in, but you could say these are the things that are really important to the city, because right now under your industrial zoning, they could just come in and remove all the trees. On a similar note, let's talk about this comment, which was to reduce the height of buildings allowed in the central
I'm sorry,
business.
through the chair, I do want to make a clarification. They could remove all the trees, but they also have to abide by
Your
our
tree
tree
production
policy. So if they remove trees, they have to replace trees.
Right.
They also are required to plant any additional trees based on the type of development that they
Right.
pull in. So it's not necessarily that they would wipe it off and it would be a big parking lot.
Right, you would lose the old growth
Yes.
trees,
Yes, the 60 or 70-year-old
Right.
growth.
which is a very, very real loss. There's only so much we can do to protect trees, though, when they're on private property, and one of those is to purchase the property so that they will forever remain in green stead, or having a deed restriction on the site. There are other legal mechanisms, but I will also note that there's litigation going on with tree protection ordinances that we have to be mindful of what's happening in the courts. A community is being sued over their tree protection ordinance. So it's a very real threat to our ability to zone things and have good policies like yours to protect trees. It's a difficult time in planning because we don't always know exactly the best, what's going to happen, in the courts. So this comment was reflecting that the building heights in the central business district, lowering them from 7 stories to 4, in particular along West 9 Mile between Livernois and Pinecrest. It's a detriment to homeowners on Withington. So this is future land use planned for mixed use. This is currently zoned C2 though, it's not in the central business district. But for clarity, we put in the maximum heights here. Mixed use district, the maximum height on this stretch is currently in the zoning ordinance. Again, this is not addressed in the master plan other than in changing its designation, I think, to mixed use potentially in the future, 45 feet. Its current height is 50 in the C2 district. To the east of there, the CBD district is broken down into 2 chunks. The downtown core is the navy blue here, which goes from Woodward to Planavon, and then this urban flex district has a 60-foot height, and then 70 feet from Planavon to Woodward, and then these red areas along Woodward are the only places where you can exceed 70 feet with up to 80 feet, but with incentives only. There are a list of incentives that the developer would have to provide in order to go that high. So we don't list stories, generally, these heights. So I can't provide a direction if you guys want to talk about whether there's any need to adjust heights at all in the MXD or CBD districts or C2 districts. This is what's allowed in zoning right now. The master plan doesn't take a stance, I should say, on building heights in this area. Another topic relates to how parks are designated on the plan. And the Parks and Rec plan has one map on page 18 that the commenter was wondering why it was listed as institutional, and that's because the school district owns the Kulik Center site, and that's how they're classified on the existing land use site. The city has a lease with the school district for using it for recreational purposes, but it's still an institutional use, so it's not a dedicated city park. But it's because it's used for recreational purposes, it shows up in the Parks and Rec plan on page 19 as a neighborhood park. So because for recreational purposes, it serves that purpose, even though it's owned by the school district. And the Kulik Center is currently shown on the map as traditional residential, as all of the school properties are in the city. And I just want to note that that designation doesn't preclude it from remaining public recreation or school uses. Those are, in fact, what make up a traditional residential neighborhood. But based on comments from council on Monday, we realized that there were little bits of green that don't show up very well on the future land use map, so we're going to add those Schiffer Park and Murray Tot Lot, because those are city parks, to the map. We're also going to add an action that provides direction to inventory all the non-traditional green space throughout the community, and inventorying how the public is using spaces, even if they aren't city-owned public parks. Another comment, similar related, about the Kulik Center, provide more information. We purposefully kept it kind of vague because the school district owns the property, and currently the city's facilities task force is working on their recommendations on what should happen on all city properties, in addition to where a community center might make sense. And so because it's still undecided, we had some language in there that said the task force is working on this. They told us on Monday that their responses, their draft recommendations will be later this fall. And whatever happens on that site has to, be in conversations with the school district, as they own it, and the Parks and Rec plan, calls for it to be a neighborhood park in the future, but it's not city-owned, and so it makes things a little tricky. So by doing that inventory, I think it'll set the plan up for this future action of trying to understand all of the nuances of places that don't show up on the map as quote-unquote green, even though they are used that way, or community gardens and school properties that have either accessible or less accessible, and that was by far a hard, large, important conversation that came out of all of the public feedback. So how do we promote non-traditional green spaces and think about ways of connecting things on private property to the public greenway system and connecting them? Another thing was we want to make sure the housing data is all from the same source. It comes from several sources, just by the nature of the type of data. So we tried to reference as much as we could from the Inclusive and Accessible Housing Action Plan, and updated where we could with the decennial census in 2020, the ACS, which is the American Community Survey estimates, which is related to the census, and then pulling information from SEMCOG over time. So hope that answers that question. We got comments from Oakland County, so as part of the review process, we send the plan to our neighbors, and didn't get a ton of feedback back, but from them there were a couple things. So they suggested that we add more about the city's Brownfield Redevelopment Authority. So we're recommending that be added to this portion of the implementation plan, where it talks about different funding sources and how the Brownfield Authority works. So we're working with the city manager and staff on crafting language there that will explain what the Brownfield is and how it works, and how the county can be a resource on that as well. And they also suggested that we add more on the hazard mitigation planning. So the county has a hazard mitigation plan, and so we've pulled some draft language over here on the right with pulling the goals from the county's plan, and then adding an action to conduct a vulnerability assessment in the future to stay in line with some of the recommendations out of that. They suggested putting it in the climate action plan. The climate action plan is really focused on carbon emissions and decarbonization, hazard mitigation is related in the field of resiliency, and we're going to thread it through in a few places in the plan, but focusing it in that action plan instead of putting it, we worry it will get lost if it's in the climate plan. So just wanted you to be aware of those comments that were provided during the review process. So again, just as a reminder, there's still more opportunities to provide comment at these upcoming events and through social media and the discussion board. When you choose to reconvene on this the next time, sometime hopefully in September, you'll have a new version of the draft that takes into consideration all the direction that we get from you tonight. And then it works through its adoption phase. So again, today is a discussion on a draft. So with that, I will pass it back to you, Chair.
Thank you, Kathleen. Does the city staff want to add anything before we open up for public hearing? No? All right. I will then invite the public for our public hearing commentary period. Just as a reminder, as you come up to the dais, please state your name and your address for the record. You'll have 3 minutes to provide your comments. And we look forward to hopefully hearing some great feedback on our draft master plan this evening.
You want to state the time you open the public hearing?
And I am opening the public hearing at 7:12. Thank you. Welcome.
Hello, my name is Eric Geiner, 510 Pinecrest, Ferndale, Michigan. Thank you guys for having us. Thank you for listening to us. On the redevelopment strategies, that's the whole reason why I'm here. First off, wrong acreage. 42 acres. It's not 42 acres. 34 acres at the most, and that is before Detroit Axle got their approval to expand. So it's definitely not 42 acres. Whoever did that research, please redo your numbers. Another thing, wrong name. It's not Hayes Ramirez. Hasn't been Hayes Ramirez for years. You might as well call it, you might as well call it Ethel Corporation. It's Detroit Axle. They own it. Before then, it was Pinecrest Holdings, LLC. Before then, it was Hayes Ramirez. Ain't Hayes Ramirez. Hasn't been for probably about 15 years now. Maybe about 12. On this page, there's a section that's about recreational. I'm not sure if you are aware that there is a desire to connect Royal Oak Township back to Ferndale, and approximately 50 years of racial and socioeconomic turmoil that's happened just due to the reduction of Royal Oak Township. There's a lot of problems that I have with this thing. The use of the word should. There needs to be a lot more musts in this than shoulds. Should opens it up to anybody, any developer that can go, oh, I'm going to do this. Oh, well, you can't. Oh, well, I should, but I don't have to. Make it a definite line. Make it a hard line. If Ferndale claims that they want to be a leader in, civic authority or anything like that, or like inclusiveness, be a leader in environmental capabilities. Keep the forest, keep the woods, keep these areas. You mentioned decarbonization of the city. What takes out what takes out carbon? Trees. Why do you all want to cut down trees that are 60, 70, 80, 100 years old? Makes no sense. Yeah, developers would replace those trees with what? Shrubs? Decorative trees? Trees that are not hard growth? Yeah, well, there you go. I wish I had more time, but unfortunately I don't. So, thank you all.
Thank you. Lynn.
Hi, all. Hello. I know very many of you know that I have the utmost respect for you because I serve with you. I serve with you or have served on the steering committee, the Arts and Cultural Commission, and I'm currently on the Facilities Task Force. My name is Lynn Clark-Geiner, and I live at 510 Pinecrest, and I'm married to that guy that just spoke. I didn't sleep last night over the page about Hayes Limeris in the plan, and I feel kind of sidelined by its addition because it wasn't there when we spoke about the plan in the steering committee. As part of the steering committee, we actually spoke about preserving that land as green space. And so now that it's written the way it is, and hopefully it will be changed or eliminated, but it comes off as a future hopeful proposal for developers. The 2017 plan was correct in identifying the land as Hayes Limeris, but they were the last owners before it went up for sale. And Mike from Detroit Axle has currently bought it, and he bought it for the express purpose of preserving it as green space. He does not want to develop it. And so my problem with that page and what the comment that I put on the master plan was that this is private property. There's already a place in the plan that addresses industrial sites and what they need to do. So why is Mike and this property being singled out against all other private owners in the city? It just doesn't make sense. And he's not happy. He wasn't informed, he wasn't consulted, and as far as you all know, you don't know what his plans are. He does not want to be bombarded by developers. And the way this is written right now, it looks like you guys have hung a for sale sign on the land so that people will approach, developers will look at the master plan and go, hey, look at this acreage. It's obviously a motivated seller because they have it written into their master plan, and he's going to be barraged with developers wanting to, don't shake your head, I'm not done yet. He's going to be barraged with developers wanting to come in and develop the land, and that's the last thing he wants to do. Mike is culturally active in our city. I don't know if you know, he is the biggest donor for the Ferndale Community Concert Band. He probably underwrites a lot of other arts groups in the city because he's just that kind of guy. He was not consulted, and it looks to all of my neighbors, and I live right across from the forest. It looks like a land grab the way it's written now, and it really needs to be eliminated. The page looks like an advertisement to developers, and it's, again, the equivalent of putting a for sale sign up. Mike has worked with Eckel or Eagle or however you pronounce it to do all of the testing, and he actually met with us as a community group about 8 months ago to explain what the testing was, and that no, he hadn't switched gears, and he wasn't planning on developing it or selling it. He was just abiding by
I'm sorry, but your time is up.
what Eagle said. I really need this page to not be in the master plan, and I'm going to take a couple more minutes because I have devoted countless hours to the city, serving on these different commissions, and I didn't sleep last night, and I'm trying not to fall apart because I'm so upset about this page in the plan. The Planning Commission cannot approve the plan as long as this page is in it. If you do, I've lost all faith and respect in the city, and all of the work that I've put into this city for me is for naught. So for me, it's unethical to have this page in the plan because it's private property and it belongs to Mike at Detroit Axle. It does not belong to the city to put it up for sale to developers. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Dave Cottrell from 1610 Bowfield.
Welcome, Dave.
Well, thank you for the opportunity to place comments in the discussion board, because I thought it was a really good method, and you're really encouraging people to get your comments in. I tried to get really concrete ones in. With the last document that was presented, I think by Kathleen here, when previous to this meeting, I would have liked to have read the document that she presented this evening, before the meeting. It wasn't part of tonight's agenda. I looked into it. It was like a page that didn't work. And it probably was part of Monday's, but I just hadn't been able to read it because I like to read the documents very detailed. When you make a presentation, you can't see all these small little words, and they're all important. And yes, I would like to see the height of property on West 9 Mile reduced from 70 feet to 40 feet. It's just like, 40 feet, basically 4 stories, seems compatible, especially on 9 Mile, but 70 feet, it's like we've all of a sudden gone from a village to moving into Manhattan, and I would like to see it reduced to 40 feet. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dave. Sherry.
Good evening, Sherry Wells. It's been a while. A few years ago, my parents died 10 weeks apart and left 63 years worth of marriage and collections in a 3-bedroom house in a 50 by 50 foot hangar in Georgia. So I haven't been as involved in Ferndale as most of you know I used to be.
Welcome back.
Well, I saw you lately. Okay. My comments about that forest, and I have been in meetings about it before, and way back when this housing development place was talking about it, what I couldn't understand are many things. And one is, since the Ferndale School District has torn down all these schools, where were the children who were supposed to live in that housing development going to go to school? There's one of the things that I have heard mentioned, and it makes sense to me, is growth cannot go on forever. Progress is defined as constant development, and those are not good ideas. There are limits to everything. Even the trees that we value so much only get so high based on whatever their genus and species is, and then they have to stop growing too. But my understanding is that sometimes nature can do remediation. Chernobyl is doing just fine. The animals there are doing just fine without people. We have animals in that forest, and they're doing fine without people as well. I think I just heard her say that there is no zoning for green space, so the only zoning thing is if it's a municipal park or something, but other green space doesn't count in a zoning plan. And I'm seeing Ms. Baker nod her head. That's something new to me, and it does not make sense at all. So those are my concerns, and growth and progress for their own sake needs to be re-examined, redefined, and humanized, but also for other living creatures, and that includes trees. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi, I'm Janet Lawless. I live at 540 Alberta Street. I'm a member of the Dales Neighborhood Association and the admin of the Dales Neighborhood Facebook page. So Eric actually encouraged people, was posting everywhere on Facebook for people to come out. And I'm glad he did, actually, because I'm sorry to see the woods being vulnerable again. It's just the Royal Oak has 2 woods. They have Cummingston Park, and they have Tenhave Woods. They're actually woods with old growth trees that have been over there for hundreds of years, and I'm wondering why we don't. Especially since Ferndale is considered so progressive and green, and he was talking about, I get nervous, I don't know why, decarbonization of the city, and you have a whole lot over there that's busy right now decarbonizing the air in our city. And she mentioned that it was if it was set as a, this is a question, really, if it was set as a PUD, it would make it less vulnerable. So I was wanted to get some clarification on that. I'm wondering why it can't be a public park. Like, what's the impediment to that? I assume costs, right? But I'm wondering, like, what would be the path to doing something like that? So, I mean, I just think, the biggest thing is, like, Royal Oak has 2 lovely woods, and I'm wondering why we can't manage one, right? I was here a couple years ago when they developed Garba Park, and now I'm seeing this park, go into the chopping block, and it's just really disturbing as a resident. I've been a resident for, including renting, about 20 years now. So, and like Sherry was saying, it is the home to deer, turkey, skunk, squirrels, fox. I mean, there's probably other animals that live in there too. That, I mean, in a way they're residents of our city that have a right to live there. And if it is, a project by the owner of American Axle, why should it be on the zoning, the master plan? Let's see here, what else? Still have a minute left. Just some questions. So I just urge the council to, consider that, that I think more than just the people here, that plot of land, those woods are really dearly loved and cherished by the city. And if not continued in the ownership of American Axle, can we consider, can we put it on, I can put it on the table that we consider making it a park, or, work as hard as we can to preserve it. Thanks.
Thank you. Welcome.
Hi. Last but not least, it's really nice to be down here and not up there. Laura Mikulski, 1015 West Hazelhurst. I've sent my comments to Greg and to Joe, and I'm assuming you all still have them. I just want to put this on the record. I'd like to see something within the plan, some consideration given to unifying and softening the divide between Royal Oak Township and Ferndale. Specifically looking at the southwest storage yard, consider some sort of visioning for the land, not the building, of the Kulik Center to make sure that we retain green space for that land, which would require some ownership of that land. And, sorry, I've got all my notes and it's a huge packet of notes. But bottom line is I would like to see something in there that makes a final judgment on the Kulik land, some sort of vision for it, some sort of attempt at ownership if possible, as well as something to program that southwest storage yard, or at least soften the divide in some sort of meaningful way. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone else for the public hearing on the master plan?
All right, I have one question about the Kulik Center.
Sure, go ahead, Eric.
So, question in regard to the Kulik Center. So, the city leases that from the school. By any chance, does the school lease half of the parking lot, the tennis courts, and up to the 50-yard line of the football field to the school? Because the city of Ferndale owns that.
Thank you. And then we have a question for Councilwoman Mikulski, if you don't mind. We have a clarification.
Laura, I've got a question for you, if you don't mind, because Southwest Storage Yard didn't come up on Monday, but it's a site I'm relatively familiar with, so I just want to ask a quick question. When you think about softening the edges, right now it's future land use planned as traditional residential. So are you thinking about how sort of roads and sidewalks and other things connect, like how city infrastructure connects in, or what do you? Is there anything in particular that you're thinking about? Because
I am terrible at visioning, so I'm open to suggestions.
Yeah.
What I don't see as unifying it in a meaningful way is a bunch of houses.
Uh-huh.
I think that there's historically been this division and no interaction between Ferndale and Royal Oak Township. Houses don't make for interaction. It would be nice to have like a path through there and make the walk from Royal Oak Township to Ferndale better, more seamless. But I would love to see something that gives students the ability to be over there doing something meaningful, residents over there sort of interacting with each other. It's a real interesting spot, and I think that we would be best served not necessarily going with just housing, but something that could really unify both communities.
Thank you. That's really
I
helpful.
hope that helps. a
Good,
little
it
bit.
does, because I was thinking, it's residential against residential, and I was wondering what beyond that you
Yeah.
were thinking about, because since it's a city-controlled site, does it become a call-out page? Is the city ready for that? Those are the questions I would have taken to Roger and Kathleen, so thank you, that's really helpful.
Great, thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else for public comment on the master plan update? Seeing none, I will call the public hearing to close at 7:32. And we have some comments to address. I think I will start with the Detroit Axle site. Obviously, it was a big topic of conversation. I wanted to start off with saying that I feel like there's potentially some misunderstanding. I heard, why do we want to cut down trees? I don't think that's the intention of this at all. However, I do understand that having this redevelopment page does seem like a call out for, redevelopment, a sale page. I do actually believe that was part of what was initially intended a long time ago when we started actually looking at the redevelopment of this site. When I worked for the city, going through our redevelopment ready communities certification, thank you, that's the word I was looking for. That was one of the sites that we were looking at redevelopment, and we did work with the property owner on that and looking at that. And this page was taken from our previous master plan, which was potentially also discussed with the property owner, and I think that we are remiss if that was not part of the process this time. I think it was just an oversight. We were taking this from the previous plan, updating it, and I have talked to the city manager today, and he is wanting to speak to the property owner specifically about this. I think we certainly can, one of the options is to completely remove this section, although I think we do want to discuss what that means. So Kathleen had stated that, if we are taking out this section, what calling out the section does is give a little bit more depth to what we would want to see. So we have to designate it for our future land use map. We had done so as industrial, as that's what it's currently zoned, and as was stated, there was a site plan that was provided in 2019 that was in the works, that had been approved during this process has since lapsed, so that is no longer a valid site plan anymore. But that was part of the process of why it was maintained as industrial. So this is really great feedback to hear from the community more of what we would be looking at. So then that comes to, okay, so what would we designate it? What do we want to see in terms of some of this language around it? Clearly identifying that, and as was stated in some of the language, is preserving the tree canopy in an open space. One of the things that we kind of butt up against is then what do we have at our disposal in terms of what we can do? And so, it was stated that we don't have this designation of open space in our zoning ordinance. We do on the future land use map, which then informs the zoning, but in our zoning, we don't actually have a designation. Did I lose? I don't know. And we also then grasp with well, this is private property. And so to downzone it from an industrial site to an open space renders that property useless. Well, not useless, that's not what I mean, but economically so potentially for the owner, and which can be considered a taking constitutionally. And so we certainly have to be, as a city, aware of what legal boundaries we have to work within. And so there certainly are, options at our disposal, though. And so I think somebody did ask, like, what are some of the other paths? And so we did talk about potentially designated this as a PUD, which would be unique. We don't have any other sites within in the future land use map that's identified as a PUD, which is a planned unit development, and that is a specific designation with our zoning ordinance, which requires a more in-depth process than a typical site plan review. That would require public hearings and noticings if there were any development plans, and then we can identify, what is important in terms of that public benefit that would be required through the PUD process. The property owner certainly has different paths at his disposal of deed restrictions or asking for rezoning themselves. Some other things that we could probably talk about, those at the top of my head. And so, sorry, actually I did someone asked for a PUD clarification. So that planned unit development, we could create that as a designation for a future land use map. Sorry, I'm kind of repeating myself a little bit, but just to make sure that I'm clarifying it properly. So that could be a future land use map designation that could then also be translated into a future rezoning of the property as a planned unit development. And like I said, that would require public hearing, a whole site plan review, and a public benefit that would be demonstrated through those development plans. Other options would potentially be for the city to buy it as a park, but I believe that the city would not be able to take on that liability due to the expense and to the environmental.
Roger answer.
Well, we can certainly have the city speak to that, but I believe that some of these are the things that we heard certainly from in the past. And around that, so I think the comments about it being singled out and for sale, I think those, we take those, I think those are really great to point out that we're remiss, I think, to specifically talk to the owner. I think that, as I said, it was coming from the previous plan, and that we're not necessarily singling it out. However, it is a very large redevelopment site within the city that certainly there is obviously passion from the community for seeing what does happen there, that we do want to identify what shouldn't happen to the best that we can within our rights as a city to tell the property owner what to do. And one other thing in regards to some of the comments that I heard around this specific site is and I think, Eric, that you were talking about this and some of the language around like preserving the key tree canopy, and it might have been talking about something else too, so feel free to clarify. But talking about must, not should, I think we do have to be careful since we can't tell private property owners to do specific things. I mean, we can only tell you so much. Of course, if you had...
We can in zoning.
We can in zoning to an extent, but we also have, legal confines within, like, we can only identify or demand that property owners, if you want to clarify what...
Actually, I was referring to possible
Microphone?
I'm sorry, I was referring to any possible future POD, any future rezoning ordinance or anything like that, not in regard to the current owner, but,
for future. For that site specifically, though? I was clear on...
Yeah, okay. Yeah, exactly, for that site. Well, actually, no. not really just because that site was only listed in that page. But I still believe that there should be more direct language as opposed to the word should. Because in my opinion, if I were a developer coming into some place and I read the word should, that shows that the city is weak on this stance and that I can overcome them, because it's a should, not a demand. Like if the city were to stand up and take a forefront up against any of these developers that have, honestly, in my opinion, wrecked the city and continue to, that would show that our city is strong, that our city is enforced, and that our city is together with protecting our city and our citizens for what we want, not for what they want. Because essentially, developers come in looking for more houses, which means more money, more profits for them.
All right, thank you. And if, I would encourage you, if you haven't already, just to specifically, since we will continue to have the draft plan available for comment, write specifically where you would like to see that, if you haven't already, so thank you. Okay, I think those are the comments that I had in terms of the Detroit Axle lot specifically. Do you want to stay on topic, or should I address further comments and then open it up to the commission?
A question on PUD, but if you, I don't know.
I think there were only a couple other comments, so maybe I'll just go with that. So, Dave, that was a good point. The presentation was not made available prior to the meeting. I don't think we always, do we provide presentations? Is that something that we could include and provide to the public? Because he's right, it can be, you know, it was a lot of great information. I know a lot of it was being updated up until today.
Like 10
anyways.
minutes before the meeting, because we were trying to make the council changes from Monday. So yeah, we'll share it.
Thank you for those last minute changes and for sharing that. All right, and then there was one other question about, and I'm not sure if any of us could answer, but perhaps the city could, or it might be something that we need to go back to the city for, is that does the school lease land from the city at the high school site? I believe was the question. And I'm not sure if we know the answer to this. See some shaking heads, so. Okay, we'll have to.
The city does not lease land to the schools. I believe the property that they were talking about was the southernmost portion of the high school property that contains half of the tennis courts, half of the parking lot, and the 40-yard line south on the football field. That was always owned by the school. And when the school was developed in the 50s, there were very I'm lost on the words, but we really didn't follow proper procedure of, you know, the school owns this, the city owns that. So when the school was built, it was just partially built on city-owned property. And for the longest time, that's what it was identified. And then in the 70s, I believe, we got a MDNR grant for the tennis courts. And at that time, it was identified that the city actually owned the property and not the school district. So the city had to apply for the MDNR grant for the tennis courts and put in those tennis courts. So the city does own that property, but because it is through improvements were made on an MDNR grant, the government does not allow, well, the MDNR does not allow us to sell that property because they see that as public use of public good. And therefore, by selling it, it is no longer under the control of the city, and they're no longer, therefore no longer available to the public good. So the city's kind of stuck having it, And there's nothing really that we can do, because we've attempted to have a land swap between the Kulik Center and the school with that property, and the DNR has, MDNR has shut us down. They will not budge. Even though they're both government entities, the school and the city, they won't budge. So that's the situation that we're in right now.
Thank you. And a question about a PUD.
Oh, sure. I had a question. I'm just curious, thinking about how PUD language is structured. So just flipping over to zoning for a moment. So if we were to future land use plan something PUD, what would that really mean? Because any planned unit development
Needs an underlying zoning.
Exactly. It's based on underlying zoning.
Yeah.
So, when it comes to dimensional requirements and parking requirements, it's always based on uses, it's always based on the underlying zoning. And so I'm kind of wondering why we would designate something PUD in the future land use map, because it's kind of designating it nothing.
Like, what uses would you assign it in the ordinance? Yeah, it's.
So,
well, and through the chair, there are state requirements of what zoning is. I mean, we can define within specific zones what is allowed, but
yes.
we're not able to create, based on state law, we're not able to create something that says green space that has no, that has a restriction of saying you can't build or you can't use it other than green space, because that's private property. You have to allow a developer or a property owner. Let's say you're just a property owner. You're a homeowner and you want to buy this lot across the street and it's zoned green space. You're not allowed then to do anything with that property. You want to build a house, you want to build a swing set, nothing, because it's defined as green space.
Yeah, that's on the zoning side, Councilmember. I was kind of thinking in the future land use plan, if we created a category for PUD, what does that really mean?
Okay.
So other communities have used the future land use plan, and again, this is this afternoon's brainstorm trying to figure out a solution. So, and they sometimes just call it plan development, and they basically put what they, in the future land use categorization, what they would eventually put in a development agreement for that future site. And you could set up a separate PUD, like the way that you guys use PUDs, you use it as, it still keeps the underlying zoning. Other places have PUD zoning, where it says PUD on the map.
Yeah.
And so you could initiate a future PUD rezone, the city could initiate, maybe in partnership with the current owner, if that's the interest, to rezone it as a new PUD district. Again, we'd have to figure out some of the legalese with the attorney and things, but they would do that and then put in the desired uses and character and some of the, like the chair was referring to with public benefit, outlining exactly what everyone's saying is most important is preserving the trees. But like you also said, Commissioner, that you have to have a list of uses, and so it can be a finite list of uses. We would have to look at precedent and zoning. We'd have to work on it, but you can we have another community that has planned development in there, several other communities that have planned development as a category in future land use.
I think Michelle mentioned that depends on having a conversation with the.
Yeah,
Is your mic on?
All right. Hi. So I think I heard Michelle say that it's the intention of the city manager to have a conversation with the current property owner, and just putting like my developer hat on. I'd be very interested in the current property owner's feelings about, while I appreciate the creativity, I'd be interested in his feedback on some of the proposed zoning changes, because his intention, and I appreciate your having had a conversation with him, right? I appreciate his his intention with the property, you know, when the property is sold, not if, but when the property is sold, he may have different feelings about what restrictions are placed on the property.
I definitely agree with Commissioner Hoskew, and rather than create another category that perhaps only relates to this site and might not be, you might improperly call it out or make it overly complex, thinking about the different spaces on the site, how those might be used, in conversation with the property owner, if there's still an industrial half and an open space half, because again, we're talking about future land use plan, right? So when it comes to open space broadly, the conversation about designating school parks as open space is something I'm completely comfortable with. Because it's public property, it's public use. If we want to have a say, we learned this the last time around, if we want to have a say in what the school board does, if they sell another site, if they want to develop a site, that they didn't include us. We weren't at the table, so it came to us with a developer who said, look, I've got an approved something from the school board in hand. So if we want to leg to stand on when it comes to open space at school sites, which are publicly owned, open space designation is something I would support. I would definitely want input from the property owner before doing anything like that on the Detroit Axle, Hazelmers, whatever you want to call it, 8 and Pinecrest site. So that's just my open space thought on there.
So I think, and two other thoughts, I don't know the environmental condition of the site. Haven't perused any sort of EA assessments for the property. Yeah, I'm sure. So all of this, while our intention is to preserve the tree canopy, if there were to be any development on the site, even if it's on the 8-mile most portion of the site, we may not have control over. In order to properly remediate the site, we may not have control over what, if any, of the trees can stay to properly remove the contaminated fill on the site. That's neither here nor there. And then lastly, my last comment is, while many of the commissioners up here have been up here for a very long time, I think we want to move through this master planning process and updating the future land use map and zoning ordinance with the assumption that we're not going to be up here, and having those call-out pages in the master plan that pull out particular properties and particular development opportunities, and really add color, not just what is it zoned for and what can we do based on the law, but what did the community tell us in the master planning process, like we want to preserve the trees, is really helpful in empowering us, and likely not me, when that site does come back for development, for us to have the teeth to say, no, we heard from the community, it's in our master plan, and we want trees. We want to see trees. So just a little added color for folks.
No, I think it's a good point. I understand the contention of calling it out without having the proper conversations with the property owner, but I think what we need to do now is have that conversation. But I think it does make sense to, like you said, to maintain some language that does show what the community wants, so that we can help identify, future development decisions. Any other thoughts on this?
I just want to share that I don't. I have a number of thoughts and comments, but there's still more investigation that we need to do. And there's still another meeting that we're going to have in September 7th, I believe.
The 21st.
Yeah, 7th or 21st, can't remember. So a lot of things are going to happen between now and then. I don't want to get myself riled up or other people riled up with what I might say, because some of those things may be resolved by the time that we have those conversations. So, I've heard everybody, and I would love, if I were king, I would say those trees have got to stay, but I'm not, and no one on council is, and we have to obey the law, and private property has, limitations and restrictions. Government can't just come in and say, you can't do that if everybody else has done that. There's precedent. And if we've allowed people to do something in the past, and now you're saying you cannot do it, you open yourself up to a lawsuit. And a lot of that falls on why we say, in a lot of things, should and not must, because when you use the word must, all of a sudden you've restricted and you've limited someone's ability to have options on their property. And again, that opens up people to a lawsuit. And if I could just add, sorry, a lot of these things too are worked out through incentives. So like with this site, there's going to be cleanup. And so whoever wants to do anything with this site, if ever, no one may never do anything, or no one may ever do anything with this site. But if someone did come forward, they're going to need federal and state funding to support a cleanup. And when that happens, they have to work with the city. And that's where incentives come in. And we have to say, if you're going to do this, then you need to meet these requirements for us. That's the only way that we can say must, because they're asking something of the government. So that's the one leverage that we have is, I don't see those trees going anywhere soon because it would take a substantial investment for that to happen. And they have to work with the city at that point.
Good point.
Through the chair, there was also a comment about building heights.
I was just going to bring that up if we were finished on this site.
And I know it's mentioned somewhere in the plan, I don't know what section it is off the top of my head, about, it being a big part. There's kind of a call out on one of the pages of the plan that says that, form, massing, density, height, like these were, big topics of discussion. It's really implemented through the zoning ordinance, but I know that it is called out in the future land use or in the plan Ferndale or whatever the heck we call it now. We don't call it the master land use plan anymore. But there is, I remember, Kathleen showing us, there's sort of a particular call out about like the conversation around those very specific items. It's intended to, as we move forward, to update zoning, inform that process.
Are you thinking of this page? The character defined, when we talk about massing and scale and step backs and facade.
Maybe it was a different page, but that might be the detail. Is that the what we heard?
Yep, so there's in the...
That section in goal 3, yeah.
Goal 3, built environment, says what we heard. 100% of community summit participants ranked massing and scale as site or building elements that need to be considered during development.
Yes.
Unfortunately, that doesn't...
More specific further down, so I don't know if height needs to be in there, if it needs to be called out more specifically.
I don't think we mentioned height specifically anywhere. But we can.
Scale means height, but I wouldn't.
We talk about the massing and scale. Massing is a size and three-dimensional form of a building. Scale is size relative to something else. And so we talk about what that means, but not necessarily identifying any metrics around that. And so at that community summit, Kathleen or Christine, who might have been closer to some of that feedback. So we talked about 100% of community summit participants ranked massing and scale as site building elements that need to be considered during development. Did we receive any further feedback other than comments that we heard this evening about what that means to people, or?
Definitely, off the top of my head, we'd have to go back and double check the comments. I know it definitely had to do with protecting the neighborhoods from not having too tall buildings near them. That for sure. It did not, from what I recall, get into the specificity of specific.
I wasn't trying.
It wasn't that level of specificity, but it was about making sure that new development doesn't negatively impact its neighbors with too much height. or massing, or, yeah.
Can you come up to the microphone, please, Lynn? Thank you. That way people at home can hear you.
It'll be on the record then, too.
We did discuss that in the steering committee, and we did go over like different neighborhoods and how it's zoned, and people wanted it reduced in the area that was mentioned and in
downtown?
other neighborhoods. And it was part of our steering committee meetings that I was a part of, several of them.
When you say that area, do you mean the downtown area that reduced? Thank you.
The area, it's just south of downtown, I believe, that you spoke about? West. I'm terrible with directions, sorry.
So the southwest of downtown, like
So-
that quadrant?
Yeah.
Thank you.
And we also spoke about height of buildings in the neighborhoods as well, that developers couldn't go beyond, I think we did 2 stories is what we discussed. And we also, at that meeting, if you remember, we talked about duplexes, so.
Right, mostly, yeah.
That's helpful. Okay, thank you. So currently, we don't have any height really specified other than, so we do talk about, in terms of the built environment, the desired outcomes being preservation and reuse of historic buildings, increasing energy efficiency, reducing water consumption, and that the character of the built environment that reflects the community needs and guiding principles. And then maintaining the city's character and vibe, which goes into some of what we're doing already with regards to the Public Arts Commission, architectural standards, building materials, tax incentives, and then that character defining page on page 62, which talks about really giving some definitions to what we mean by architectural style, facade composition, pedestrian realm, facade design, massing and scale, and step backs. But no kind of specifics about what we're intending.
Through the chair, I'm not suggesting that we put figures in this document. That's more appropriate in the zoning ordinance, but in the interest of plain language, like we talked about earlier, massing and scale means something to people who are architects or perhaps planners, but but height is a universally understood term. We can even debate stories and floor heights and stuff, which we do here. We regulate based on, higher first floor heights and mixed use buildings and stuff. But specifically, that would be a word that I'm sure came up in plain language in conversations.
Are you making
So
a
I'm
suggestion?
Yeah, I've actually already sent an email asking for a printed version of the most recent changing and getting updated, which it should. So I've noted that this is page 60-ish. Because I think, again, just in the interest of plain language.
To include discussion about height?
Building height, yeah, so that when we come back and reference this as we're updating zoning, it's clear that was part of the conversation.
Right, so I guess what I was kind of trying to describe is what do we even have in here that we could reference? And I think this does a really great job of helping the reader understand what we mean by some of these terms. And I think that putting those definitions is really helpful in having these conversations. So when we talk about character and about a neighborhood in particular, this can help us talk about, okay, well, height is important, but really I also care about the massing and scale, or having a step back for light filtration, or looking at this facade composition, using some of this terminology and understanding what am I seeing if I don't have that language, which I frequently don't as not a non-architect, to be able to describe, okay, well, I have this general sense of what I want. I want it to kind of be this because this is what I'm familiar with, but what does that really mean? What is actually important to me, and how does that then translate to future development? So I think this is really great, but yeah, we don't necessarily, on these pages anyways that I can see, really talk about height particularly, so there's not necessarily any recommendations currently. So you were going to make some suggestions to add height language. Do we, are we also talking about like limiting height in certain areas, or?
I don't know if they talk about limiting, but it needs to be part of the consideration. If we're talking about scale, form, massing, just again, where height fits into that is going to be important as we think about zoning, but I'm not going to say should be X or Y or Z.
Gotcha. To be noted that that was a recommendation from the public within our planning process. Again, to be stated that building heights in the CBD, which are currently around 7 foot, and we had a little bit further nuance in that, then recommended to go to 4 stories.
I guess I'm trying to maybe get it clarified. From what I read maybe is the current documents regarding like West 9 Mile between Planavon and Livernois, or Livernois and Pinecrest, and saying that it was listed in the current documents as like 70 foot for, I guess it was CBD, and that's what I thought was way too high. So I looked at current, like,
for the zoning ordinance,
and that's what I saw. So that's what I wanted to, thought should be much lower.
Gotcha. No, thank you. Yes. Yeah. So we're just kind of clarifying what is in the master plan, maybe what should be in the master plan, and then ultimately what ends up in the zoning ordinance, which is informed by the master plan.
Just to clarify, there's one section in the zoning ordinance, this is taken directly from the CBD ordinance and the other districts. There's another place where height is mentioned, and where you used to have from here to here it's this, from here to here it's that. We just need to double check that section. I think some of it might conflict with the overriding CBD amendments when I was pulling this table up. So I don't think, though, that anywhere between Pinecrest and Livernois, I will help. It's not part of the CBD, and it's not at 70 feet. So right now it's at 50 feet. It just changes as you move east at Planavon, and then gets a little taller, and then the highest heights are only on Woodward.
Thank you for those comments. I believe that speaks to the public comments that we heard and any questions and kind of clarifications. Was there any other topics in regards to what we heard from the city council's comments, or anything else that I know we've seen the master plan a couple times already here and have talked about it at length. Anything else for this evening's conversation? And we will see this again with another public hearing at one of our next meetings, either September 7th or 21st. Hearing none, I think we can then move on to our next public hearing. Thank you, everyone.